So welcome to Unit 7, Cognition, Thinking and Language. This module is module 36, and there are 5 learning targets. Okay, so at the end of this module, hopefully you'll feel more comfortable with this information that I'm going to cover right here. The first learning target is describe the structural components of a language. The second is to discuss how we acquire language and explain the concept of universal grammar. Maybe a new concept to many of you. Discuss the milestones in language development, like how babies and young children develop language, and identify the critical period for acquiring language. Discuss the brain areas that are involved in language processing and speech, and describe the relationship between thinking and language, and discuss the value of thinking in images. So what is language? It's our spoken, written, or signed words and the way we combine them to communicate meaning to other people. So language transmits knowledge and allows for mind-to-mind communication. When you think about it like that, it's sort of a fascinating way to really conceptualize what language is and how most animals don't have anything even coming close to a language, right? And how it has helped humans to be able to become who we are because of our very sophisticated language abilities. So what are the structural components of language? There are 3 of them that we're going to discuss: phonemes, morphemes, and grammar. Phonemes are just the smallest distinctive sound units in a language. Morphemes are the smallest units that carry any sort of meaning. It could be a word or even a part of a word, like a prefix or a suffix, something that gives meaning. Grammar is a system of rules that enables us to communicate with and understand others. So linguists surveying almost 500 languages have identified that across the world, there are 869 different phonemes in human speech, but there's no language on Earth, maybe in another planet, just kidding, that uses all of them. So we're obviously going to focus on English. It's the only language I know, although I took German for a long time. To say bat, English speakers utter phonemes, b, a, t, 3 phonemes. To say that, we also utilize 3 phonemes, even though there are 4 letters. So th, a, t. Phonemes are sounds, not letters, and they're not the same thing as syllables. So that's something to really get clear in your mind, that phonemes are not the same as letters or syllables. They are the individual spoken units of sound in our English language and other languages. So morphemes, most morphemes combine 2 or more phonemes. Some are words, while other are word parts. So morpheme, meaning. That's what you should be thinking in your head. Morphemes are connected to meaning. Every word in a language contains 1 or more morphemes. The word readers, for example, contains 3 morphemes. 3, you might say? Okay, so the 3 morphemes would be read. That's the first unit that has meaning. The second unit that gives some meaning. It signals that we mean one who reads. And then the S, of course, gives us meaning too, meaning that not one, but multiple readers. Grammar, some of us have struggled with this one. Rules for word order and word meaning help us to understand the language. 2 components of grammar are semantics and syntax. Semantics is about selecting the correct word to come up with meaning. Syntax is about putting the words in the right order according to grammar standards of your particular language. So Noam Chomsky is a famous linguist, very famous linguist, who uttered the sentence, "Colorless green ideas sleep furiously." He used this sentence to illustrate correct syntax. The nouns, adjectives, and verbs are all in their proper place grammatically, but there's poor semantics. The choice of words don't convey the appropriate meaning. I mean, for most of us at least. What is a green idea? And how can it be colorless? How do we acquire language, and what is universal grammar? So Noam Chomsky, who has studied tons in the area of linguistics, has argued that language is nature's gift. It's an unlearned human trait. So when we go back to that whole big idea within our whole AP psychology class, there's a lot about universal grammar and language that Chomsky would say is built in, more of the nature versus the nurture. Of course, you need both to become sophisticated in your usage of language, but there's some sort of innate mechanism there. He theorized that a built-in predisposition to learn grammar rules, which he called universal grammar, helps explain why preschoolers are able to pick up language so readily and use grammar so well. Watching language development unfold is fascinating. Children's language development moves from highly simplistic, starting uttering sounds in infancy, to highly complicated sentences by the time they are a few years old. By 4 months of age, babies can recognize differences in speech sounds. How does receptive language develop? So receptive language is what you can understand. So early on, babies start understanding language much more quickly than their expressive language, their ability to utter words, for most babies at least. In one study, babies preferred looking at a face that matches a sound, an ah coming from wide open lips and an e coming from mouth with corners pulled back. Recognizing such differences marks the beginning of the development, very, very simplistic part of receptive language, their ability to understand what is said to and about them. Babies at about 4 months, the stage that happens is this babbling, the stage of speech development in which an infant spontaneously utters various sounds. If you've ever been around a young baby, it is fascinating to watch this unfold. It's at first unrelated to the household language. So at the early ages, babies are able to become proficient at any language, but that changes as you get older. We'll talk about that in a moment. Long after the beginning of receptive language, babies' productive language, their ability to produce words, matures. So the stage in which speech development from about age 1 to 2, during which a child mostly speaks in single words. Again, there's huge variability across development in many ways, but with language especially, there are some kids that pick up things very, very quickly and others that take a little bit longer. Around their first baby, most children enter the one-word stage. They have already learned that sounds carry meaning, and now they begin to use those sounds. Like, I feel like my younger son's first word was ball, and I'm blanking at the moment on my older son's first word, and I remember him wanting a ball that I was holding in my hands. Usually only one barely recognizable syllable such as ma or da to communicate meaning. So at about 18 months, children's learning of language explodes from about 1 word per week to a word per day. And again, this is sort of an average. There's definitely variability. By their second birthday, most kids have entered into the 2-word stage, sort of putting 2 things together to convey meaning. So at 2 years, kids will be saying things like want juice or play outside or something like that, putting 2 words together, a noun and a verb. Their speech follows rules of syntax, arranging words in a sensible order, and it's magical how it unfolds. English speaking children typically place adjectives before nouns, white house rather than house white, and Spanish speaking natives reverse this order, such as Casablanca. So telegraphic speech, the 2-word stage produces sentences in which a child speaks like a telegram. Go car, or something like that, using mostly nouns and verbs, so it is referred to as telegraphic speech. So is there a critical period? Childhood seems to represent a critical, or what we call sensitive period, for mastering certain aspects of a language before the language window slowly closes. Later than usual exposure at age 2 or 3 unleashes the idle language capability of a child's brain, producing a rush of language. But by about age 7, sorry about my dog in the background, by about age 7, those who have not been exposed to either a spoken or a signed language may lose their ability to completely master any language. Can we learn a new language as adults? Well, 10 years after coming to the US, Asian immigrants took an English grammar test. Although there is no sharply defined critical period for second language learning, those who arrived before age 8 understood American English grammar as well as native speakers. Those who arrived later did not. So what about deafness and experience? The impact of early experiences is evident in language in prelingually, before learning language, deaf children born to hearing non-signing parents. These children typically do not experience language during their early years, so they're not hearing any language going on. Natively deaf children who learn sign language after age 9 never learn it as well as those who learned it in early life. An aphasia is an impairment of language. And if you've been listening to all of the modules and following along with the AP psychology textbook, the Meyer Psychology for the AP 3rd edition, you've heard the terms Broca's area and Wernicke's area. So Broca's and within damage to the left hemisphere, you could have a Broca's aphasia, which would there be an impairment in speaking, or a Wernicke's aphasia, which is an impairment in understanding of language. In 1865, Paul Broca confirmed, this is how we came up with the term Broca's area, a fellow physician's observation that after damage to an area of the left frontal lobe, a person would struggle to speak words, yet could sing unfamiliar songs and comprehend speech. A decade later, a German investigator, not a French investigator, this guy, Carl Wernicke, discovered that after damage to a specific area of the left temporal lobe, later named Wernicke's area, people were unable to understand others' words. So they could speak, but the sentences, they could only speak meaningless sentences. So Broca's area helps control language expression. Sorry, my dog was barking. Broca's area helps control language expression, an area of the frontal lobe, usually in the left hemisphere, that directs the muscle movements involved in speech. So there's problems speaking if there's damage to the frontal, if there's damage to Broca's area. Wernicke's area is a brain area involved in language comprehension. So rather than the expressive part, it's the receptive part. Usually in the left temporal lobe. How are language and ideas related? So linguist Benjamin Lee Whorf contended that language itself shapes a person's basic ideas. His hypothesis is termed linguistic determinism, and it proposed that language controls the way we think and interpret the world around us, so that language actually drives the way that we think. Really fascinating to think about. For instance, the Hopi, a Native American tribe, have no past tense for their verbs. And so they could not readily think about the past because a specific language may lack certain types of words. It actually seems to have an effect on how they think. Today's psychologists believe that a strong form of lots of dog issues this morning. Today's psychologists believe that a strong form of Whorf's linguistic determinism is too extreme. We all can think about things that we have no words for, and we routinely have sort of wordless images or thoughts, as when someone, while watching two men carry a load of bricks, wondered whether the men would drop them, in this experiment listed right here. How about the term linguistic influence? The weaker form of linguistic relativity, which is the idea that language affects thought. Thus, our thinking and worldview is relative to our cultural language. So it's related and affects it, but it's not everything. Words do influence our thinking. Another example, in New Guinea, children in a certain tribe have words for different shades of yellow, which might enable them to spot and recall yellow variations more quickly. So words do seem to influence our thinking. On the color spectrum, blue blends into green until we draw a dividing line between the portions we call blue and green. Is that where you would draw the dividing line? Probably I would. Although equally different on the color spectrum, two different items that share the same color name as the two blues do above are harder to distinguish than the two items with different names, blue and green. So the traffic runs both ways between thinking and language. Thinking affects our language, which affects our thought. So it's sort of this reciprocal relationship. Do we think in images? Indeed, we often think in images. Artists think in images, so do composers, mathematicians, athletes, scientists, and many others. We often think in images when we're using our non-declarative memory system, as we talked about a few modules ago, that procedural memory, or our automatic memory system for motor and cognitive skills, and those classically conditioned associations. For someone who has learned a skill such as ballet dancing, even watching the activity will actually activate the brain's internal simulation of it. Imagining a physical experience activates some of the same neural networks that are active during the actual experience, which is fascinating, right? I've been reading more about some professional athletes, Olympic athletes actually, as well, who utilize this this imagery as a way to actually practice when they're unable to do so, right? Just keep doing it over and over again. Imagining the physical experience activates some of the same areas within their brain as if they were actually doing the particular experience. One experiment on mental practice and basketball free throw shooting tracked the University of Tennessee women's team over 35 games. During that time, the team's free throw accuracy increased from about 52% in games following standard practices, physical practice, to some 65% after mental practice. Players had repeatedly imagined making free throws under various conditions, including being trash talked by their opponents. So another way that visualization can really help, it can help improve grades. Two groups of introductory psych students facing a midterm exam 1 week later. In the first group, they spent 5 minutes each day visualizing themselves scanning the posted grade list, seeing their A, beaming with joy, and feeling proud. This daily outcome simulation had little effect, adding only 2 points to their exam score average. The second group spent 5 minutes each day visualizing themselves effectively studying, reading the textbook, going over notes, eliminating distractions, and declining an offer to go out. So the daily process simulation actually paid off. The group began studying sooner, spent more time at it, and beat the other's average score by 8 points. So it's important to remember it's better to spend your fantasy time planning how to reach your goal rather than focusing on that desired destination. It's really important to think about. So we are already to our learning target reviews. So the structural components of language: phonemes, morphemes, grammar. Phonemes are the language's basic units of sound. They don't correspond necessarily to just letters. They are the basic units of sound. Think about bat having 3 sounds, b, a, t, okay? But so does that, v, a, t, even though it has 4 letters. Morphemes are the units that have meaning. So morphemes, meaning. Grammar is the system of rules that enables us to communicate. Includes both semantics, the rules for deriving meaning, and syntax, the rules for ordering words into sentences. Linguist Noam Chomsky has proposed that all human languages share a universal grammar, which are basic building blocks of language. This is universal across the globe, and that humans are born, there's an innate predisposition to learn language. As our nature and our nurture interact, we learn the specific grammar and vocabulary of the language we experience as children. So while we have the ability to learn any language on earth, we, as our biology and experience interact, we readily learn the one that we are, our environment provides to us. But if we would have been born in another sort of culture, another place, we would have been able to learn that language as well. So language development's timing varies, but generally all children follow the same sequence. Receptive language is your ability to understand what is said to you, develops before your expressive language, before your productive language. At about 4 months of age, infants start to babble, making sounds and languages from all over the world. By about 10 months, their babbling contains only the sounds found in their household language. Around a year, kids generally start speaking in single words. The 1-word stage evolves into the 2-word stage, which is called telegraphic speech. So utterances before the 2nd birthday, after which they begin speaking in full sentences. Childhood represents a critical period for language learning. So critical period or sensitive period for language learning. Lack of exposure to a spoken or sign language by age 7 appears to result in the inability to master any language. Deaf children born to hearing, non-signing parents often demonstrate the effect of this on early language experiences. There are two important language areas, Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Broca's area is a region on the left frontal lobe that controls language expression, you're speaking. Wernicke's area, a region in the left temporal lobe, controls language receptive. That receptive language also assists a bit with expression. Language processing is spread across other brain areas as well. Don't think that language is just in those areas. It's spread across your brain, where different neural networks handle specific linguistic subtasks. Worf came up with an idea called linguistic determinism that suggested that language defines thought, but it may be more accurate to say that language influences thought. It's a little bit milder way of saying the same thing. Different languages embody different ways of thinking, and immersion in bilingual education can actually enhance thinking in different ways. We can think in images, many of us do, when we use non-declarative memory, which can also increase our skills when we mentally practice upcoming events. Something to take into account if you're practicing something or want to do really well at something, that even imagining yourself doing it can have an effect on your later performance. Thanks for listening. That's the end. That is the last slide for this module. Take care.